that also brings me to another thing that was major in The Crown. It kind of looked like Thatcher was loved by everyone for a very long time, and then suddenly her awful ministers turned on her and brought her down. And I think this whole discussion kind of proved that it was not the case. And I was wondering if you can tell us what actually brought Thatcher down.
Well, 1987 saw Thatcher's election victory, which was her third election victory. And many people, as you can imagine, particularly the tops of our movement, were demoralised, a bit like when Boris Johnson won the general election this time round. But the militant analysis was that there is a burning resentment and anger underneath the surface as a result of the poverty measures that the Tories had forced through. Thatcher overestimated her position because she judged the mood of the working class by its leadership. And Kinnock, by this stage, was beginning to roll back the socialist offensive that we'd had inside the Labour Party. As a consequence of that, she introduced the hated poll tax, or community charge as it was called. And instead of the valuation of a house being based upon the value of the house itself and what you paid in rates, they decided to levy a tax on every individual in every household, and exactly the same amount, irrespective of the value of the household. And that meant immediately at a stroke, working class families, particularly large working class families, would be faced with impossible poll tax bills. And the militant devised a strategy, very bold in its execution, I have to say, of mass non-payment, particularly given the position of the trade union movement. We had to go into working class communities round the estates and build up anti-poll tax unions. First in Scotland, where Thatcher decided to use that country as an experiment. She introduced the poll tax in there first, and then the following year in England and Wales. And what shocked the entire movement was the emergence of the poll tax non-payment figures. In Scotland, 1 in 4 people weren't paying the poll tax, despite the threat of arrest, bailiffs and imprisonment. And the following year, when that came into England and Wales, a comparable army of 12 to 13 million non-payers emerged. Now that took a hell of a lot of work, and it was only the militant that was capable, first of all, of organising that movement and had the confidence in our class that the working class would respond. And the huge army of non-payers brought about the end of the poll tax, because ultimately the Tory cabinet realised that Thatcher's game was up. They could no longer sustain a prime minister that was presiding over what was in effect an unpayable tax and the collapse of local government finances. They therefore realised they had to move against her. And once they moved against her, the Tory party are very ruthless with their leaders. Johnson better watch out. Once they moved against her, they stood a stalking horse against her, a candidate who attracted enough support to trigger an election, and then her advisors said to her, "It's time for you to go." And so Thatcher departed 10 Downing Street, yes, thrown out by her cabinet ministers, but as a direct result of the mass non-payment of the poll tax, orchestrated and led exclusively, I have to say, by the militant through the All Britain Anti-Poll Tax Federation.